All right, so the long-awaited, much-anticipated Exorcist has arrived on 4K UHD from Warner Brothers, and I've got a lot to say about it, so let's get into it. What is up, everybody? Welcome back to Mid-Level Media, your hub for everything physical media and entertainment. I am Ken. Today, guys, we are here to talk about The Exorcist on 4K. One of my most anticipated 4K releases of 2023 has finally arrived on 4K UHD. One of the greatest, most legendary horror films is finally here from Warner Brothers. What took you so long, Warner Brothers? They actually announced this last December, though, at the very end of 2022 when they were putting out their 100th anniversary slate, telling everybody what they were going to do. The Exorcist was the big title in that slate, so this definitely meant a lot to Warner Brothers to put out. And yeah, we've been waiting a long time to get this on 4K. Was it worth the wait? We're going to talk about that in today's video. I'm going to talk about the movie. We're going to talk about the 4K transfer, the audio quality. We're going to talk about the special features. We're going to talk about this beautiful Best Buy Steelbook right here. We're going to do a little unboxing of this as well. And I will say though, guys, this Steelbook is going to be pretty hard to come by at this point. It's completely sold out on the Best Buy website. Maybe if you're lucky, you'll be able to go into your local store and find it, but I really doubt it. This thing is sold out across the board. I will be leaving the link for the slipcover version, the standard 4K release with the horrendous artwork. Maybe you like it, but it's pretty bad. I'll show it up there. I'll link that down below in the description. It's $23.79, so it's not a bad price. So if you want to get it based on my review, whether or not I recommend it, you can do that. I will link it down below in the description. All right, let's go ahead and get into it. Like I said, I like talking about the actual film itself first. This is my favorite horror film of all time. I just watched it, so I do want to talk about the movie before we dive into all of the technical aspects of this release. So this movie came out in 1973, directed by the great William Friedkin, of course, legendary William Friedkin, R.I.P. He recently passed away. Now, this movie was nominated for Best Picture, which is pretty damn extraordinary for a horror film because the horror genre does not get recognized a lot at the Academy. So for a horror film to get recognized and be nominated for Best Picture is kind of a big deal because it's happened maybe twice since this movie. Silence of the Lambs, Get Out are the only two that come to mind for me. So for a horror film to kind of break that glass ceiling, transcend the genre, and just be that prestige Oscar-worthy film is really something that does not happen often. Should definitely be celebrated for sure. So yeah, The Exorcist was a huge box office success as well. Everybody went to see The Exorcist. Everybody was afraid of The Exorcist. It was a cultural phenomenon. So not only was it a prestige horror film with tons of accolades, it was also a box office smash hit, and everybody went to see this thing, and everybody was afraid of it, and everybody loved this movie. So that's why it maintains that iconic status all these years later. 50 years later, they're getting ready to do The Exorcist sequel with David Gordon Green directing, which I am not too happy about and I am not looking forward to. You can call me a hater all you want, but to me, The Exorcist is one of the purest horror films of all time, and I just don't like to see its legacy being tampered with. And this was written by William Peter Blatty, who not only wrote the screenplay to this movie, but he also wrote the novel to which this movie was based on. So very rare for somebody to do the novel and also the screenplay, but William Peter Blatty did. And then years later, he would go on to do, to write and direct The Exorcist 3. This is also starring Linda Blair, who plays the little girl Reagan, who, you know, is pictured right here. You got Ellen Burstyn, her mom, also Max von Sydow as the old priest, Father Marin, and Jason Miller as the young priest, Father Karras. So terrific cast in this film, and everybody plays their part to absolute perfection. And yeah, guys, what can you say about The Exorcist that hasn't been said a million times before? Just one of the greatest horror films of all time, one of the scariest horror films of all time. But I will say, if this is your first time watching this movie, because I always think about this, people in their teens, people in their 20s, you really have to put yourself back in 1973. And I didn't see this movie in the theaters. Obviously, I wasn't alive then. But you have to put yourself back 50 years ago. They were not doing stuff like this in film back in the 70s, at least not in the United States. So people that watched this movie in the theaters, it was so scary to them. People were fainting. People were puking in the theaters over this movie. This was a huge deal back in the day. And I know we've kind of been desensitized by some horror films, you know, in the past 20 years, especially when we got to the 80s and people were just hacking and slashing and blood was flying everywhere. And so you have to understand, you go back and you watch this movie, the scares, the horror, it's much more subtle. It's much more subtle. This is really a slow burn. It builds and builds and builds, you know, that tension until you get that final scene with the two, you know, priests in the room doing the exorcism, Father Marin and Father Karras. And then it's kind of the set piece of the film, you know, everything that's happening with Regan and her levitating off the bed, spitting up green stuff everywhere, the green pea soup or whatever you want to call it. The power of Christ compels you. Like, all the iconic moments happen towards the end of this film. There's definitely some more sprinkled throughout the film, but it's a slow burn. It doesn't get you, you know, from the very beginning. It builds, it establishes the characters, it establishes the circumstances, the relationship between all the characters, all of their problems that are going on, and then it kind of just brings them all together in the end under these dire circumstances with this demon from hell that has possessed this little girl, and you feel so bad for her. You want her to get that demon out of her, and the priests are your only hope. And it's just so good, guys. And you have to understand that. You have to put yourself back in that mindset. You cannot watch this, you know, with a 2023 mind and then go back and watch The Exorcist and say, oh, that's mid. That's not, I don't understand why that's one of the greatest horror movies of all time. You can't do that, guys. You have to understand. I feel like I have to defend this movie because I've been seeing it, guys. I'll be honest. I've been seeing some people go back and watch The Exorcist and they'll be like, I don't get it. I don't get why that's one of the greatest horror movies of all time. And it's frustrating to me because it is mine. This movie, to me, it changes with me over time. This is not a movie that I rewatch very often. I've probably seen it 11 or 12 times in my entire life, but I watched this for the first time when I was 12, and it scared the shit out of me when I was a kid. And when I got into my teenage years, it started to change a little bit. I started to, you know, notice more of the things that you can kind of make fun of this movie for. You know, your mother sucks cocks in hell. All the lines that Regan says throughout the film. You know, it's very easy to make fun of. It's very easy to make light of, to make a joke out of, and kind of have a laugh about. And this has been parodied to death. You got Scary Movie, Saturday Night Live back in the 70s did a parody with Richard Pryor, which is extremely hilarious. And then when I got in my 20s, it got back to being like super scary for me. And then now, like, it's a completely different experience for me when I watch this, because the scares really come for me in the first half of the movie. You know, I put myself in Ellen Burstyn's shoes, being a parent now of 2 kids. I put myself in her shoes and having to go through, you know, your daughter, something's wrong with her. You don't know what it is. Nobody can help you. Who can help her? Nobody. She doesn't know what's wrong with her daughter. Her daughter's fine in the very beginning. She has an imaginary friend, Captain Howdy. And then all of a sudden, she's freaking bouncing up and down the bed. The bed's moving. She doesn't know what's going on. She's doing all these tests. She cannot figure out what is wrong with her daughter. And it just gets worse and worse and worse. And that is absolutely heartbreaking to me. And it's scary as hell, because you put yourself in that situation and you think to yourself, what would happen to my daughter if that happened to my daughter or my son? Or whatever, what would I do? And the fact that it keeps getting worse and worse, and then her personality changes, and that's the scariest part to me of this movie. That's where most of the scares come from for me. And, you know, this whole set piece and everything that happens at the end is just kind of icing on the cake. So, yeah, I absolutely love this movie. Just one of my favorite movies of all time. It's in my top 10 movies of all time, but it's definitely my favorite horror film of all time. Now, let's go ahead and get into the transfer, guys, because I know you guys want to know about this 4K transfer. This is a native 4K restoration with HDR10, and you also get the theatrical cut and the extended director's cut on 4K in this set, and they are both on separate discs, which I actually did not know about before I got this Steelbook. So the fact that they did both cuts on 4K is really freaking awesome. It's something that you don't see a lot lately. Everybody complains about, you know, how they did this cut in 4K and did this cut in Blu-ray and did this cut in 4K. The cut I wanted was on Blu-ray and the cut I didn't want was on 4K. Well, with this, you have both versions on 4K, guys. Extended director's cut that William Friedkin did in 2000, and you also have the original theatrical cut in 4K. So I actually think that was really cool of Warner Brothers to do that. So that's definitely a big positive for this release. And I even went back and looked at my old Blu-ray right here. This is just the extended cut on this Blu-ray edition, and my DVD is also just the extended cut. So I feel like ever since 2000, they have primarily just been putting out the extended version and not the theatrical version ever since William Friedkin redid it. Now, there was a release back in 2013 that did have the theatrical version and the director's cut on Blu-ray for the 40th anniversary. But this is the first time since that release that we are getting the theatrical cut and the director's cut in the same release. So that definitely needs to be celebrated. And getting into the actual restoration here, I think it's really solid. It's not a blowaway transfer to me, but I think it's probably the best that Warner Brothers could have done, which is why I'm not going to be too hard on them with this restoration. Was I hoping for it to be a little bit better, a little bit stronger all throughout the movie? Yes, I was. But I think at the end of the day, this is definitely the best that we probably could have hoped for this movie, because it is a movie from 50 years ago, guys. It's a movie from the 70s. It was filmed almost like a documentary. That was what William Friedkin was doing. It feels very raw. It feels very gritty. So because of the way he filmed it, I feel like there are certain sequences and scenes in this movie that they just couldn't get to look as good as they could have otherwise. But I think it's a really good transfer where when it shines, it really shines. Some of the stuff in the beginning with Max von Sydow in Iraq, some of those sequences in the desert are truly probably some of the best scenes of this movie. All that stuff looks spectacular. You also got a lot of the outdoor sequences, you know, in Georgetown with Ellen Burstyn kind of walking through the streets. All that stuff looks good. The green trees and everything in the background, just the actual like red brick on the buildings, all that stuff looks spectacular in 4K. Such great detail. You can recognize and make out everything. So there are definitely some really great moments in this movie and some other scenes that to me were just a little rough. Like there's some certain sequences where it's just like, it feels like it goes all the way back to like DVD VHS quality. And I watched those scenes on the Blu-ray and it looks similar. So I just feel like those are scenes that they just can't quite get right. So I'm not really going to fault Warner Brothers there. It's just when I'm thinking about it, look, I'm not a professional review critic on 4Ks on here, guys. You're going to find people that are much better at breaking down this kind of technical stuff. But I can only base, you know, my enjoyment of a 4K with how it looks. I can't base it on, you know, what they could or could not do with the transfer and the restoration. How does it look to me? That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm giving my thoughts on. And I would say there's a large part of this movie that looks spectacular, that looks great. There's other parts of this movie that do not look great. So that's where my disappointment comes in, just the inconsistency and how it kind of goes back and forth from looking really awesome to not so awesome. And that's where kind of some of my problems go in. But I'm not blaming Warner Brothers. Again, they did the best they could. And this certainly, guys, I popped in this Blu-ray, like I said, and watched a little bit of it. This is certainly miles ahead of this Blu-ray release back in 2011, 2013. And what that HDR does for some of the scenes and sequences in this movie, particularly in the end, the last 30 minutes of the film in the bedroom, is truly spectacular. That green puke sludge stuff that comes out of Reagan's mouth down into that purple cloth, that has never looked as green and as vibrant as it does with this 4K and that HDR. So that looks spectacular. The blood looks great. There's a moment where they show that like above shot of Reagan laying in the bed and her face is all mangled, messed up. She's got the green stuff all over her face and she's got the scarring. And it just does like a close-up on her face. And you could just, I've never noticed Reagan sweating like she does in this movie. And I'm sure that it's always been there, of course, and you can probably always notice it. But I've never actually really noticed it like I did with this 4K restoration. You can just see the drops, the beads of sweat all over her face. And I just thought that added to the disgusting nature of the moment and what was happening in those scenes. So that was definitely a standout for me. But look, at the end of the day, guys, there's small gripes. This really does look the best it ever has. The detail is extraordinary. What that HDR does with the colors is just spectacular. I think this is a really good restoration at the end of the day. And getting into the audio, guys, this was a real highlight for me. You had Dolby Atmos on both the theatrical cut and the director's cut of this film, and you get the 2.0 mono, but that's only on the theatrical cut. But with that Dolby Atmos, I didn't even know that that was supposed to be in here until I got it and put it in and checked it. So that was a real nice surprise, and it sounded spectacular, guys. Absolutely spectacular sound-wise. This is the best thing about this release, in my opinion. So I'm just listening to this on a soundbar that kind of simulates that Atmos, and I've got a subwoofer, but very, very awesome sound in this release. The subtle moments like the attic creaks and stuff like that, you can just hear all that stuff perfectly. Like I was hearing stuff like behind me that would just add it to the effect. But there's also the big moments as well where you hear Reagan roaring and the bed shaking up and down and the doors slamming, everything flying around. But all that shines in the Dolby Atmos and just adds to the overall experience of watching this movie. Now, getting into the packaging, I'll do a little bit of a Steelbook unboxing right here. You do get this J card with the 100th anniversary banner at the top, which I know a lot of people aren't a big fan of. But flip it on the back right there, and you got, you know, all your stuff on the back. You have the Supernatural Masterpiece, more powerful than ever in 4K. I would definitely agree with that. You got some other images. You got, you know, the special features, which we'll talk about here in a second, all the specs and everything that's included here. And then we'll go ahead and take the J card off, and I'll show you. And again, I'm going to be cutting to a little unboxing at the table here, but great cover. I absolutely love this. I'm just in love with this image of Reagan right here. I think it's freaking awesome. On the back, you have the window, which is very cool. Open it up. You do also get a digital code here. You get 2 discs, both in 4K, and I'll take those discs out and show you the image underneath. And the interior artwork is awesome because it's Reagan levitating as they're, you know, throwing holy water on her, saying the power of Christ compels you, which is just one of the best scenes in the movie. And then I'll show you the back right here again, displaying the Steelbook in all its glory. And finally, guys, getting into the special features, this is where I'm going to have to be a little bit negative. And we've been talking, this is nothing new for Warner Brothers. We've been talking about this all year, but they don't have any of the special features that were on that Blu-ray disc. They did not port any of those over. So if you have the Blu-ray release from 2011 or 2013 and it has all those special features on it, you're gonna have to keep this Blu-ray if you want to keep those features. Now, what this does have is the audio commentary of William Friedkin on both the theatrical cut and the director's cut, and you get an audio commentary with William Peter Blatty on the theatrical cut only, not the director's cut. And you also get an intro by Friedkin on the theatrical cut only. That is not on the director's cut. So you get some stuff here with the commentary and the extra intro, but that is it, guys. And everything else that they had, I think there was a making of on here. New 3-part documentary on the movie's production and legacy. None of that is included in this 4K, which I just think is completely ridiculous. If you're going to put out the definitive 50th anniversary release of The Exorcist, you need to at least include, you know, it's enough you're not doing new special features. You need to do new special features for this movie that's such an important part of your legacy as a studio. But the fact that you're not even going to, you know, bother to port over those extras from the previous releases, I just think is ridiculous. But look, Warner Bros., at the end of the day, guys, I think it was really cool they did both movies on 4K and put that out. So that alone to me is worth the price of admission of $23.79. And I think it looks really good on 4K, guys. I don't mean to downplay it at all. There was just some rough moments throughout, but I think overall this is a really solid 4K restoration and definitely worth your time and money. Again, I will link it down below in the description if you want to purchase it. But thank you all so much for watching my review of The Exorcist on 4K. Please, if you can, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, comment down below your thoughts on this movie and this 4K release. Turn on the bell notifications for all future videos and follow me on all my social media accounts. Those links are down below in the description, and we'll see you next time.